What's going on, guys? Dare here with Fantasy Football Advice, coming at you with another fantasy football video. Today, week 14, wide receiver starts and sits. That's right, first week of the playoffs. Congratulations to those of you who have made it this far, and at this point, we really shouldn't be trying to get too tricky. Start your studs is the best approach. However, there are some matchups we should be looking to avoid, and other flex type players that are virtually must starts. Big news, guys, we have opened up the website so everybody has access to the rankings through the fantasy playoffs. It's our way of doing whatever we can to help you guys reach that championship and bring home that trophy. While you're there, check out the sports pick'em bets. The results are super impressive. All of that will be open to you. Check out the website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. Link for that, as always, in the description box below. But we do have 16 matchups to go over, so we might as well hop right into it, and we're going to start with the Thursday matchup. We have the Cowboys versus the Bears. We saw what happened to the Bears last Thursday. They got completely torched by David Blount. Kenny Golladay, Marvin Jones, they both had spectacular days, so it's not outside the realm of possibility for both Amari Cooper and Michael Gallup to have solid fantasy performances. So even though Chicago is a top 5 defense against fantasy wide receivers, we're still starting them as wide receiver 2s with some potential upside. Amari Cooper will fall in line with more of a mid-grade wide receiver 2, whereas Gallup's expectations should be in that high-end wide receiver 3. The volume is more in Amari Cooper's favor, but if you own either one, it's best you try to fit them in the lineup. On the other side of the ball, Allen Robinson, he's still a guy you start every week in the wide receiver 2 slot, and even though Anthony Miller has been on a complete tear, Dallas's pass defense does deserve respect, so the safety is obviously with Robinson, but for desperate owners looking to fill that flex spot via the waiver wire, riding the hot hand does have the potential to pay off. However, those were really poor pass defenses, and he is still yet to score a touchdown in all of 2019. On to the Sunday slate, and we're going to start with the Ravens versus the Bills. Marquise Brown, after having a monster performance with 2 touchdowns, posted a complete dud, 1 reception, 1 yard, and we could potentially see the same again this week. They face the Bills against similar defenses like the Patriots in San Francisco. His production was definitely bench worthy, but if you've been relying on him, starting him in the flex does have a chance to pay off, but there are certainly a lot of options out there that we would start over him. Mark Andrews, tight end auto start, and there's no other Baltimore receiver anybody in the playoffs should be putting in their lineups. But for Buffalo, we have John Brown and Cole Beasley, who is worth talking about. For Brown, though, this is a game in which they're 5.5 point underdogs at home. So a passing game script late in the game is extremely likely. So garbage time points from John Brown, that's a realistic expectation. Start him as a low-end wide receiver 2. Just understand he does have some variance. Cole Beasley, however, a similar outcome could be expected for him. He is coming off of 2 games, scoring back-to-back touchdowns with 6 receptions each. Just keep in mind, those were his best games on the season, and in the fantasy playoffs, to just trust Cole Beasley, you really should be relying on the players that got you there, and losing with him in your lineup would haunt you the entire offseason. That's enough about that, though. Let's get into the next matchup. We have the Bengals versus the Browns, and with Andy Dalton starting, Tyler Boyd instantly gains value, and on top of that, John Ross was activated off the IR, giving this team one more weapon in the passing game, which should open up even more opportunities for Tyler Boyd himself. Neither Auden Tate or John Ross should be in anyone's lineup, but Tyler Boyd, a back-end wide receiver 2 in this contest, and as 8.5 point underdogs, there is the potential upside for an explosion type performance. For the Browns, Jarvis Landry continues to impress, another double-digit target performance, and at this point, we only have Odell Beckham and Jarvis Landry separated by 2 spots, both of which are high-end wide receiver 2s, low low-end wide receiver ones. So needless to say, we're starting both. Odell Beckham could certainly replicate the type of performance Robbie Anderson put in just last week against Cincinnati. So don't be afraid to start him this week. He 100% has a good chance to score. And for one of the most talented receivers in the entire league, there still is a ton of upside in this start. Carolina versus Atlanta, and we currently have Julio Jones as trending downward when it comes to potentially suiting up, which would of course boost the role of Calvin Ridley, Austin Hooper if he's able to play, and even Russell Gage. We're not starting Gage in the playoffs. As it stands, if Julio is out, Calvin Ridley would be able to perform as a wide receiver 2 and a high-end one at that. Carolina, it's not the easiest matchup. They have shut down several talented receivers this season, but being at home in the Dome with one of the higher projected point totals of the week at 47.5, on top of being the main target in this offense, it would be silly not to rank him as a high-end wide receiver 2, and one that certainly has boom potential this week. Their defense is pretty poor. The Carolina receivers, DJ Moore, Curtis Samuel, they should have no problem getting it done either, which will force Atlanta into a situation where they're passing late. The last time these two teams faced, DJ Moore went 8 for 95 yards. Curtis Samuel didn't have his best day, 4 for 25 with a measly 6.3 yards per reception, which was actually his lowest of the season. He's still on the risky side though. We have him ranked as wide receiver 42 behind the likes of Sammy Watkins and Brandon Cooks, Marvin Jones, and Marquise Brown. So if we're predicting which of those boom bust receivers is going to have a better game, he is still trailing behind the others. Greg Olsen, he did suffer a concussion last week, and with concussion protocol, it's up in the air if he's going to play or not, so continue to monitor that. I know a lot of people would immediately give those targets to DJ Moore or Curtis Samuel, but in the absence of Greg Olsen, we do see Ian Thomas stepping up. So while it would raise their ceilings, it's not necessarily going to raise their floors. If Olsen does suit up, he will be inside the top 12. We wouldn't risk it with Ian Thomas if he's out. And as for DJ Moore, since we haven't ranked him yet, he's going to be inside the top 10. So expect good things from him. Let's bounce back to Austin Hooper though. If he does play, he'll likely see no fewer than 5 targets. Primarily his role will be in the red zone. He did miss the first game against Carolina, who at this point in the season are ranked 6th against opposing tight ends. George Kittle himself went 6 for 86, which is of course a solid day, but overall they've been pretty limiting to tight ends. So if you do have one of the better options, the Darren Wallers, Mark Andrews, Hunter Henry, those would be the preferred options over Austin Hooper, considering he is coming back from injury. But in the thin TE landscape, we have no problem with you starting him so long as he's healthy, he's practicing, and there's no word about a potential snap count. Coming up next, we have the Green Bay Packers versus the Washington Redskins. We'll start with Washington, and it's pretty simple. Terry McLaurin, he does have flex appeal this week. He's proven that in decent matchups he can produce. Just don't trust him as anything more than a flex, and one that you know has a lot of volatility. For Green Bay, there really is one man as well, and that's Davante Adams. Coming off a 2-touchdown performance and subpar play from most of the other receiving options, Davante Adams remains a premier start at the position. In fact, we have him ranked once again as the number 1 wide receiver in half-point PPR. We're not starting Lazard, we're not starting Scantling, and we're not starting Allison, so we can move right on from this matchup and into one that has plenty of receiving options. We have the Lions versus the Vikings. Adam Thielen did not play last week, which is going to benefit Stephon Diggs. His performance last week was underwhelming to say the least, but with Dalvin Cook banged up, potentially no Adam Thielen, coupled with the fact that the last time Detroit and Minnesota played, he posted 7 receptions for 142 yards. Diggs is certainly in the wide receiver 1 conversation, and that's exactly where we have him ranked. On the Detroit side of things, Matthew Stafford was confirmed to be week to week, and it looks like they're starting David Blount once again. Jeff Driscoll was placed on IR, and Blount certainly played well enough to deserve that starting spot. Can he repeat a type of performance like he had last week? That's still to be determined, which does increase the risk factor for both Marvin Jones and Kenny Golladay. But at this point, seeing what they did last week, you're almost forced to put them in. We're still considering Kenny Golladay a wide receiver 2 and a back end one at that, with Marvin Jones in his typical area area of a boom or bust flex play. The last time these two faced, Marvin Jones actually accumulated 10 receptions to Galladay's 1, not to mention his 4 touchdowns. But different quarterback, a defense that will come more prepared. Our money's certainly on Galladay in this one. Not too much to go over in this one. We have New Orleans Saints versus the San Francisco 49ers. Michael Thomas, he's going to be facing one of his biggest tests this week. The 49ers pass defense is one of the best in the league. However, Michael Thomas is the best wide receiver in this league from a fantasy point perspective. So while massive upside is likely not there, he 100% should have a good game and will likely be your highest scoring fantasy receiver, even against a tough San Francisco 49ers secondary. For San Francisco, Deebo Samuel remains the start that we would prefer. However, we would only be expecting wide receiver 3 type numbers, meaning a flex start is definitely worthy. Just keep in mind he has had a combined 6 targets over the past 2 weeks, and if there isn't enough volume, there's going to be a high amount of variance, and that's what you're going to get with Deebo, but he certainly has been efficient, and he's produced for 4 weeks straight. So if any San Francisco receiver, it's going to be him, and we're not starting Sanders. Any risk that is associated with Deebo goes double for him. Moving on to a very interesting matchup, we have the Tampa Bay Buccaneers versus the Indianapolis Colts. Tampa Bay is at home, they are favorites, and T.Y. Hilton, he has a chance to play, but you should be prepared to go without him. Considering this is Tampa Bay, who really can't stop the pass, if T.Y. Hilton does play, he has wide receiver 1 upside, and Zach Pascal, he's 100% a solid start as well, regardless if T.Y. Hilton plays or not. There's definitely enough receiver production to go around versus Tampa Bay, and Pascal separated himself as the number 2 option, and nobody would be surprised even if Hilton's out there if Zach Pascal does outscore him. It's worth noting that Jack Doyle is also worth a start. He's someone that you can still find on the waiver wire, so if you're streaming tight end, he will be one of the better options this week in a game that should have a ton of passing production. For Tampa Bay, very simple. Start Evans, start Godwin, and we're not starting anybody else. Dolphins versus Jets, and surprisingly, we have 2 wide receivers we're very interested in this week. Devontae Parker, really proving himself consistently. We have him ranked as a mid-grade wide receiver 2. In this surprising turn of events, Robbie Anderson seemingly has came back from the dead. While taking a back seat to Jamison Crowder for the majority of the season, he's been surprisingly good and has an excellent matchup versus the Dolphins. We have him ranked just outside of wide receiver 2 territory, which for him is a significant bump up considering he always has been classified for us as that high variance boom or bust flex play. And this week, he should have the safety and the upside that we're looking for when deciding how to fill our flex positions. Jamison Crowder as well can be started. It's the Dolphins. We would much prefer Anderson over Crowder, at least in this matchup, but if you have Crowder, putting him in the flex as well can certainly pay off, and we have him ranked inside the top 30. Up next, we have the Denver Broncos versus the Texans. Not a very high over-under or projected total for the Broncos, but Courtland Sutton remains a must-start, and Drew Lock appears to be a capable enough quarterback to support these big games from Courtland Sutton. You can't start anyone else, and we have Sutton ranked as a back-end wide receiver 2, and as 9-point underdogs, even in a low total, he will be the main target in the passing game, so he's definitely somebody you want to get in the lineup. For Houston, pretty underwhelming performances from Will Fuller, also DeAndre Hopkins, but we've seen it with both of these players throughout this season. The Denver Broncos, they're not an ideal matchup. So Fuller, if you do have better options, we can't blame you for starting somebody over him. For us, we prefer to have him as a flex play, a volatile one at that. And DeAndre Hopkins, we still have him ranked inside the top 5. So a bounce back performance from him is something we expect this week. Chargers versus Jags, and to start with the Jaguars, DJ Chark didn't produce at his ceiling last week, but he did have a decent floor. Dede Westbrook, he had the better fantasy day, but with Gardner Minshew starting, we do have a history showing us that DJ Chark is still the man, so we have him ranked as a wide receiver 1. Dede, he's more of a flex this week. Titans versus Raiders, and I'm not all that excited about any player at the receiver position on either of these teams. For Tennessee, guarantee you're not starting anyone. The only ones on Oakland Oakland you could consider are Darren Waller, also Tyrell Williams. However, if Tyrell Williams didn't produce against Kansas City and has scored single-digit fantasy points in 4 of the last 5 contests, you don't need me to tell you it has a ton of risk. So a boom or bust flex play, sure, but the odds of him hitting are less likely than the odds of him posting a dud. For Darren Waller, we have him ranked as the number 6 tight end on the week, so start him and start him with confidence. He's still one of the few tight ends that does have that massive upside to where it can really be a difference maker between you and your opponents. Moving on to a game that has the highest projected total of the entire week, that's the New England Patriots versus the Kansas City Chiefs. And with the Kansas City offense, it's basically strength versus strength. The Patriots are one of the premier pass defenses in the league, but if anyone can get it done, Patrick Mahomes is certainly the guy, meaning Tyreek Hill, don't leave him on the bench this week, even though there is that small chance that he does get shut down. There have been receivers to get behind the Patriots. If anyone can do it, it's Patrick Mahomes. The Patriots would be giving up a lot to completely shut him down, especially considering Travis Kelce and Sammy Watkins are certainly capable of performing as well, so it's almost a double-edged sword for them. Tyreek Hill is still ranked in the top 5. It's not as guaranteed as it is in other weeks. You just have to adjust your expectations while also understanding he still has upside even in a tough matchup. For the Patriots, we basically have Julian Edelman and nobody else we can count on. It is against the Kansas City Chiefs, who have been known to rack up the points, forcing the opposing team to also do the same, especially through the passing game. But there's one man this ball goes through in the air, and that's Julian Edelman. He had 12 targets last week, turned that into 6 receptions for 106 yards and a touchdown. And even against tougher defenses like Dallas or Baltimore, he still had 8 and 10 receptions, averaging over 90 yards in those 2 contests. He's a mid-grade wide receiver 1 in half point and gets even more of a boost in full point PPR leagues. There is some upside and potential for the other receivers like Mohamed Sanu or Philip Dorsett, but neither one are locked and loaded or people that we can even recommend you flexing because there simply isn't enough volume outside of Julian Edelman. Pittsburgh Steelers versus the Arizona Cardinals, and the big news here, Juju Smith-Schuster, he's questionable for this week. If he does play, it still has risk because the changing quarterback throws a curveball in the target distribution, and we saw James Washington step up and produce, even eclipsing 90 plus yards in 3 of the last 4 games, also scoring in 3 of the last 4 games as well. So he is someone worth consideration whenever somebody goes hunting with the quarterback. For some reason, it equates to fantasy points. We still have him outside the top 36 though, so there are several players we would prefer to start over him. But if you are somebody who is extremely thin at the wide receiver position, James Washington is somebody that you could entertain. He did only get 4 targets last week, which should be a major concerning factor. For Arizona, it's pretty simple. The only wide receiver we're starting is Christian Kirk, and even with Kirk, it's not like he's going to have massive upside. He is the main target in this offense, but we did drop him a little bit in the rankings just due to facing the pass defense of the Steelers. They smothered the Rams, they looked good against Cleveland, and let's face it, Kyler Murray can be a bit hot and cold, and this is certainly the type of defense that could give him a run for his money. We do have him ranked as a high-end wide receiver 3, so preferably a player you put in the flex, but for those teams that have really strong receiving cores, debating between which 3 top 20 players you're going to be starting at the position, Christian Kirk is likely not that guy, and he's nobody that we're really trying to force in the lineup. The Sunday night game, we have the LA Rams versus the Seahawks, and this game comes in at the 2nd highest projected total, and you can feel good about almost every receiver in this game. Tyler Lockett, it came out that he had the flu. We have seen that affect other players historically, and while we're not completely giving him a pass, he still has one of the highest potential regardless of how many targets he gets. He's one of the few receivers that can take 3 targets and turn that into 100 yards and 2 touchdowns. So in a matchup with the 2nd highest projected total, he's not a guy you want to leave on the bench. We are still high on DK Metcalf for good reason. He's going to be ranked inside the top 30, meaning for most teams, if you own him, he's going to fit in your lineups. And although I'm sure most of you are aware Josh Gordon still has not carved out a role in this offense, so there's no way we're putting him in. And in fact, he's probably droppable if you're not in a keeper league, because there's no way, even if he produces this week, he's had a large enough sample size for you to trust him in week 15, let alone week 16. For the Rams, Robert Woods is continuing to dominate. He's going to be climbing in the rankings, and deservedly so. Cooper Kupp still remains a guy we trust. He's ranked inside the top 10, but Robert Woods, he's somebody you can safely start as a wide receiver too. Brandon Cooks, however, he's droppable. Similarly with Josh Gordon, even if he has a big game, it's not like you could really trust him in week 15, at least not for guaranteed points. So filling that spot with maybe a defense that has a great week 15 matchup, or a handcuff to one of your top RBs, may be a better use of that bench spot, and potentially have one of your opponents picking him up, using him against you in a gamble that probably will result in a poor performance, making your odds to reach that championship that much closer. The final matchup we have, the Monday matchup, it's the Eagles versus the Giants. Alshon Jeffrey, 16 targets. He now faces one of the league's worst pass defenses that give up a ton of fantasy points, and considering it's divisional and this team still has an outside shot at clinching the playoffs, there's a good chance he produces again. Is 16 targets realistic? Not likely. He looked very hobbled last game, but like I said last week, 2 touchdown upside is definitely in his range of outcomes. And if you've stashed him this long and haven't started him yet, this is certainly the week that you could count on him to produce for your team. Zach Ertz, he was outproduced by Goddard, who has quietly put together a pretty solid season at the tight end position, so starting either one is completely acceptable. We of course would still recommend starting Ertz, because while the production wasn't there, he still is the most talented player on this offense, so there's little to no risk, plenty of reward. And for Dallas Goedert, we have him ranked inside the top 10 as well. For New York, Sterling Shepard, on paper, it's a really easy pass defense to take advantage of. However, they're much better against the slot than they are against outside wide receivers, so if Golden Tate doesn't play, he's likely going to be from the slot, which typically is something we look forward to, but could ultimately cap his upside. Considering the lack of targets in this offense and how banged up every player is, he'll remain a start as a flex, one with a safe floor, but the ceiling most people are expecting may not actually come to fruition. If Golden Tate does play, Shepard will take more snaps from the outside, which could boost his overall upside, but at this point it's still unclear, and considering it's the Monday night game, regardless of what the outcome is, you're likely going to be sticking with him or taking him out either way. But guys, that's gonna do it for this video. We really hoped you enjoyed. Congratulations on making it this far. Good luck this week. We're one step closer to the championship, and we'll be by your side the entire time. If you did enjoy this video, please be sure to hit that like button. If you're new to the channel, please hit that subscribe button. We thank you all for watching, and we'll catch you on the next one.